Brachot habaot, ladies, and thank you so much for tuning in to part 2 of our Torah lesson, Purim, the end of our lesson of Chag Purim, and the downfall of Haman, and all the lessons that can be learned from this particular story. We're so happy. I'm so happy that you're so devoted to your souls, your neshamot, so diligently tuning in, following, whether you're a YouTube subscriber or if you are logging on to Torah anytime or to ohelsara.com. Thank you so very much. This shiur is dedicated to our incredible donors who have so far donated so generously to our campaign to try to raise funds to get our own unit here in Eretz Yisrael, to have a Torah center of spirituality and encouragement for women and young girls, a place that will be designed as an apartment, as a home, so that when people enter, they can feel the warmth of a house. I want to thank all of you. This shiur was dedicated to you and to all our future donors who I know are still logging on to www.ohelsara.com and trying to make your donations. It's still not too late. Purim has its influences throughout the entire month of Adar. And as we know, the month of Adar, which is in itself a miraculous month, leads into the month of salvation and redemption, which is the month of Nisan, the month where the Jews were redeemed from Mitzrayim. So we appeal to every single one of you, please help us. Help us help others. We want to continue to do our good work. We want to continue to support our good and worthy cause. We want to continue to be able to spread Torah, not just on Torah Anytime, not just on ohelsara.com, not just through YouTube. We want to be able to continue to do what we do here in Eretz Yisrael. So please, I ask you all to log on to www.ohelsara.com, click on the donate button, and show us your tremendous support. I thank you all, and I wish you a tremendous day. In yesterday's shiur, we left off learning about how the story of the Etz Hadat contains similar patterns to the story of Purim, where the story of Gan Eden seems to repeat itself in the story, specifically at this point in our shiur, the story of Haman and his wife Zeresh. We also said that the struggle of Haman and Zeresh was the same struggle that Esther experiences with her husband Ahasuerus, the king of Persia. Let's see what more unfolds as we proceed with both stories, the story of Gan Eden and the story of Purim. The entire shiur, we've been discussing the meaning of godly knowledge as it relates to the Etz Hadat, Tov Vara, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We asked what it means when we talk about good. Do we confuse the good in the sense of what we want with the good in the sense of what's truly right and just and moral? Or can we effectively separate those two and understand the difference between them? So let's go back to the story of Gan Eden and see what more there is to discover. Chava is created, and there she is in the garden, surrounded by all these trees that she could eat from and delight in. Life is pretty unrestricted, except for the one command she has to obey. There's this forbidden fruit that contains a mysterious forbidden knowledge. Adam and Chava are told by Hashem that if they acquire this knowledge, they're going to die and become mortal. In the end, sadly, Chava eats the forbidden fruit and gives it to her husband to share in this forbidden knowledge. Now, let's go back to the Megillah. After Esther HaMalka Alea Shalom is chosen by Ahasuerus to become new queen of Persia, is there a command given in the Megillah that's similar to the story of Gan Eden? Is there forbidden knowledge which Esther dare not impart to her husband? Absolutely. Esther's identity becomes the forbidden knowledge. It's like the forbidden fruit. Although Esther is chosen as queen, the Megillah states, "En Esther magedet moladeta." Esther does not reveal her identity or her birthplace, or that she was in fact a daughter of Israel, a Bat Israel. Why didn't she reveal this knowledge to Achashverosh? Ka'asher tziva aleha Mordechai, because Mordechai had commanded her not to. Interesting. Here too, we see a woman who must not impart certain knowledge to her husband. It's a forbidden knowledge that could actually get her killed. And it's not just the general idea that's the same here. Even the language is the same. How? In the story of Gan Eden, the pasuk states, "Vayetzav Hashem Elokim al ha'adam lemor." And God commanded upon Adam, saying, ... And there we have in the Megillah almost the identical words, where the pasuk states, "Ki Mordechai tziva aleha shelo tagid," because Mordechai had commanded upon her not to reveal anything about where Esther came from. In the Megillah, Mordechai is sort of occupying the role of Hashem kiviyachon, as if, just like in Gan Eden. In other words, Hashem in Gan Eden was the one who commanded Adam and Chava about the forbidden knowledge of the tree. And now Mordechai is the one issuing a command to the new Chava, so to speak, to Esther, commanding her about what she must and must not tell her husband. And it's interesting that the pasuk in the Megillah talks about Mordechai strolling in the palace gates using a very strange terminology, where the pasuk states, "Umordechai mithalech." The word mithalech in Hebrew grammar is what we call a hitpa'el form of walking. It's a very unusual form to describe a person walking. Why? Because what it basically means is that he took himself for a walk. And we don't say that. And interestingly, that's the last time the word mithalech is ever used in the Torah HaKadosha. But you know when that word first appeared? Back in the story of Gan Eden, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mithalech bagan, when God, so to speak, was strolling in the garden, whatever that strolling means. So Mordechai is metaphorically occupying the role of the leader in this case, the one who issues a command about some kind of forbidden fruit, forbidden knowledge. But if all of this is correct, if the interaction between Mordechai, Esther, and Achashverosh really does simulate the story of the Etz Hadat, then the Megillah's version of that story is now about to take a reverse twist. V'nahafachu. We're going to see an incredible reverse effect right in the middle of this Etz Hadat replay. Let's see how. Mordechai, the very person who commanded Esther not to impart this forbidden knowledge about her true identity to the king, suddenly does a switcheroo. V'nafachu. He comes to her and he says, "Tell your husband Ahashverosh the forbidden knowledge." Because as you know, Haman has issued a decree of genocide against us all. So you have to go and tell Ahashverosh who you are and beg him to save our people. The one who said, "Esther, you cannot impart that knowledge. I command you. Whatever you do, never say anything," now says, no. The reverse is true. Go feed the forbidden fruit to your husband. In both instances, he's commanding Esther. First, Mordechai commands her not to speak. And this time, he commands her to reveal that which she was commanded to remain silent about. What is Esther's response? she says something that fits in perfectly with the story of the Etz Hadat. She says, I can't do it because if I do, I'll die. Very interesting. It seems that giving over forbidden knowledge is something that creates some kind of deadly outcome. She says, Kol ish ve'isha asher yavou el hamelech el chatzer hapnimit. Any man and woman who comes to the king, to the inner courtyard without being summoned, they're taking their lives into their hands. They're most likely going to be executed. And you want me to go? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Suddenly you want me to reveal this forbidden knowledge, the terrible news to the king that his queen is from the unpopular nation, the nation that his Secretary of State wants to wipe out off the face of the earth? I don't think he's going to take that news too well. I mean, he may have been fine taking a queen from among the commoners, but now that Haman painted such a lowly and grotesque picture of the Jews, how happy is Ahasuerus going to be when he finds out that I'm from among these people? It's bad enough that I'm appearing before his majesty without being summoned, but when he hears that I'm a Jewess, it's going to be off with my head. Now listen to what Mordechai replies. He reverses the story of Gan Eden. He says, no, Esther, you have it the other way around. You must go to the king. You must feed him this knowledge. If you choose to be silent in this moment, if you won't offer this knowledge, abundance and salvation will stand for the Jews one way or another. Hashem will save us from something else or someone else. But ve'at ubet avich tovedu, you and your father's house are going to be ultimately destroyed. So if it's death you're worried about, I'm telling you that if you don't appear before Ahasuerus, you'll surely be destroyed. It's the complete reverse, Esther. So Esther says, very well, I'll risk my life. I'll go to the king and impart to him the forbidden knowledge of who I really am. And then she says, but if you're reversing your command, I too have a command for you. Lech, go, knos et kol haYehudim, gather all the Jews together, vetzumu alai, and you and them should fast on my behalf. Al tochlu, do not eat. Esther imposes this command for 3 days and 3 nights. You can't eat, you can't drink. Chachamim say, we're not going to get into the details today because we have a lot to do, that it was actually a tikkun for the Etz Hadat, that because she ate, now it was the time not to eat at all, some kind of tikkun of fasting for these 3 days. But the point is that Mordechai heeds Esther's command. The pasuk says, Vaya'as kechol asher tzivta alav Esther. He did all that Esther commanded upon him. Everything's reversed. V'nafochu. The entire tree of knowledge story is now upside down. Instead of not reaching for the forbidden fruit, Esther must now reveal and give over the forbidden knowledge. So Esther is now left with a very serious challenge, which is that she has to tell the king who she really is. Now, way back in Gan Eden, Chava gave Adam the forbidden fruit, and the result was disastrous. But here in the story of Esther, she needs to find a way to give Ahasuerus the forbidden knowledge in order to avert a disaster. If she could find a way to accomplish this task, she's going to do a tikkun for the sin of the Etz Hadat. Because Esther is going to go through the same exact act that Chava did when she gave the forbidden fruit to Adam. Using the medium of food and hosting a banquet, Esther is going to impart knowledge that's very dangerous to her and the entire nation. She's going to impart this knowledge to her husband except that that act, instead of being destructive, will be the most compassionate deed. It's going to be an act of saving people. It's not going to kill anybody. It's going to save us all. But Esther faces a great challenge, because in order to somehow give this knowledge to the king in the correct way, she's going to have to do it in a manner that distinguishes between the two types of good, of tov. What does that mean? She's going to have to clearly define what subjective desire looks like and how that's very different from the right thing to do. When she does that, she'll redeem the great sin of the Etz Hadat. So here we are at the climax of the Megillah, where in the scenes that follow, Esther approaches Ahashverosh 4 times, each time taking one step closer towards her goal, which is the salvation of the people. Now, if you read the Megillah's language as she makes these attempts, you'll see that she uses the language of Tov and Ra during her appeals to Ahashverosh. But she doesn't just talk about Tov and Ra. She talks about it in the right kind of way, which means, can Esther, in imparting this forbidden knowledge to the king, when she reveals her identity to him, can she put together the words Tov and Ra in a way that she actually tells the king something about the nature of Tov and Ra itself, meaning what good and evil actually look like? In other words, can she talk to him not just about what he, the king, wants to do subjectively, but about what he should do, what the moral thing to do is? If she could successfully do that, she could create a tikkun for the sin of the Etz Hadat. If she could find a way to give her husband this forbidden knowledge in a way that conveys accurately the knowledge of good and evil, rather than its imitation, which is that self-serving blindness of, if I want it, it must be good and right. If she could succeed, then Esther emerges victorious. So let's see how she manages to succeed. The first thing she does is invite the king to a private banquet. Listen to her invitation. She says, Im al hamelech tov, if it is good for the king, if it pleases the king. What kind of tov is she referring to? Obviously, she's talking about subjective desire. Im al hamelech tov, if you like this, if it's good for you. So what's happening is that she's using the subjective kind of tov, and she hasn't yet gotten to the point where she's actually imparting any form of moral clarity. So far, she's still just in the world of the king's subjective and personal desires. Let's continue. After the king comes to the banquet, she says, well, why don't you come back to another banquet? And again, she says, Im al hamelech tov, if it pleases the king, if it's good for the king. She's still just talking about his desires. And notice how she hasn't yet mentioned the word Ra, which is the other side of the equation, right? So it's like the Megillah is kind of going out of its way to tell us that her job isn't yet complete. She's only halfway there. Let's see what she says at the final banquet. At that last banquet, she begins just like she did before. She says, Im al hamelech tov, if it pleases the king, tinaten li nafshi b'she'elati. Give me my life as my request. Ve'ami bevakashati. And give me my people's lives as well. She finally reveals who she is. She gives him the forbidden knowledge. She now has both sides of the coin, because she doesn't just talk about the tov. She starts to introduce the ra. Because when Ahashverosh asks her, who is this man who threatens you? She points to Haman and she says, Haman hara hazeh, Haman, this evil man. Oh, she's now spoken about both good and evil. Seemingly, she's completed her mission. She's given Ahashverosh the knowledge. She spoke about Tov and about Ra, and we assume, oh, okay, her role in the story has come to an end. But if we read the Megillah, we see that she's still not done. Even though the king hangs Haman, the decree against the Jews stands, because the law was that a decree that was signed with the signet ring of the king cannot be rescinded. So if the Megillah would have ended over here, God forbid, all of the Jews would have died, which means the queen, Esther, has to approach the king one last time in order to create a salvation for the Jews. Why? Because Esther has not yet made a moral case before the king. Everything so far has just been a function of his subjective desire, his needs, his wants. So Esther has to talk to Ahashverosh not just about his personal desires, but about what's truly right. And she hasn't done that yet, not completely. Think about the words that she repeats again and again every time she speaks with Ahashverosh. Im al hamelech tov, im al hamelech tov, im al hamelech tov. She always says, if it pleases the king, if it's good for the king, if it's pleasing to the king. But if she never moves from there, if it just stays with the king's subjective wants and desires, then it's really all about what he wants to do and not what's morally just. Now, from the king's perspective, he might be thinking, actually telling Esther, Esther, if I'm the king and it's all about what I want to do, im al hamelech tov, and if you're asking me nafshi, right, to save you, nafshi b'she'elati, and if you ask me to save you, and if the question you have is that do I want to save you, the answer is yes, because I love you, and that's why I'm going to save you. But if you're asking me if I want to save your people, ve'ami bevakashati, the answer is not really, because I don't love them so much. So I want to save you. That's what I want to do. But regarding your people, I don't really want to save them. And if they die, that's perfectly fine with me. So at this moment in the Megillah, although Haman is pretty much dead, the decree against the Jews still stands. That's why Esther needs to approach the king to make one last appeal, and it cannot stop with what he wants to do. It has to end with what's right for him to do. So a few days later, she returns to the king for one last desperate plea. Esther begins with Ahashverosh's subjective desire, the same way she's always done. Im al hamelech tov, if it's good for the king. But then you see that she starts taking a gentle step forward and she says, Vekasher hadavar lifnei hamelech. If the thing seems right, morally, if it seems fitting before the king. Kasher is a much more subjective word than tov. It's a word that signifies the other meaning of tov, the meaning of tov of what's morally good, what's morally just and right. And interestingly, this is the only time in all of the Torah that the adjective kasher is ever used. Even in Sefer Vayikra, when the Torah discusses kosher foods, the word kasher isn't actually used. It's phrased in terms of tameh and tahor, pure and impure. But the modern sense of us talking about something that's kasher, the only source for that idea of kasher as an adjective is actually right here in Megillat Esther, when Esther speaks with Ahashverosh. So let's see what she says. She says, if it pleases you and the thing is fitting, if it's kasher, Esther is now beginning to take Ahasuerus on a journey from his subjective desires, from what he wants to do, to what he really should do. The next thing she does is to invoke the word tov one more time, but she takes baby steps with Ahasuerus and she says, V'tova ani be'enav, and if I'm good in your eyes, in other words, if you look upon me and you see good, then I have a good argument to make to you, Ahasuerus. Eichacha uchal v'ra'iti bera'a asher yimtza et ami. How can you expect me to stand here safe and sound in the palace as I watch the destruction of my people, as I watch the evil that will befall my nation? Boom, that's it. That's it over there. Esther uses Tov and Ra, but this time in a way that actually creates a moral argument. She's leveraging Ahasuerus's subjective desire to talk about what's actually right and what's truly wrong. What's her real argument? She says, if I am good in your eyes, if you really love me, then it would be an act of appalling evil to allow somebody that you love to witness the demise of all her people. It would be wrong and such a crime to do that. And it's deeper than that. Because when she says the words, Im tova ani be'enav, if I'm good in your eyes, what do these words really mean at this point right now? You see, in the past, they may have meant if I please you in terms of if you desire me, but that was before. That was before Ahasuerus knew who Esther really was. But now he knows. So you know what Esther basically revealed to him? The greatest reason why he should hate her, not love her. After all, she comes from that lowly nation that was supposed to be exterminated by his Secretary of State. I mean, it's one thing to love Esther when she was this anonymous woman and Ahasuerus could pretend that she was anybody that he wished her to be. But once she revealed the truth, that she comes from the nation that's considered the dregs of society according to the Persians, can Ahasuerus look Esther in the eyes and tell her that he still loves her? So she was saying, if you look at me, V'tova ani be'enav, and I'm still good in your eyes, if you still care for me, as indeed you must because you killed Haman and you saved me, then I'm going to extend that argument and use it to have you recognize not just my humanity, but the humanity of my people. In effect, Esther is saying, if you've accepted my identity of who I really am, if it is my humanity that you were willing to accept despite me being one of the Jewish people, then whether you like it or not, you have to tolerate and accept them as human beings as well. You have to keep them alive. So please save my people. It's at that moment that Esther finally redeems the story of the Etz Hadat. She's found a way to convey forbidden knowledge to her husband, dangerous knowledge, knowledge that could kill her. And she's found a way to bring moral clarity to her husband's subjective view of the Jewish people and of life. Now, we learned in part one that the story of the Megillah is almost like a replay of the story of the Tree of Knowledge. And we've learned the dynamics between Esther and Ahasuerus, how she seems to redeem the original Etz Hadat story. But to understand the grandeur of what she does, let's go back one last time to the failed Etz Hadat replay. The failed replay is the story of Zeresh and Haman. And in the contrast that we're going to see between the failure of Zeresh and Haman and success of Esther with Achashverosh, we're going to find the key to the power of love and a woman's role in a marriage. Now, we'll begin by saying that one of the surprising things that emerges from the story of Zeresh and Haman versus Esther and Achashverosh is the rule of love as a potential moral force. Love as a force for good, koach, to do tov. But in order for love to be that force for good, it requires a little backbone. It requires ometz, courage. Sometimes it requires you to stand up to the one you love and demand something different from what they think they want. So let's go back to Esther and the king for a minute. What she's really doing is starting with the king's subjective desires, his wants, but then she takes him somewhere else that he may actually not want to go to all on his own. She makes that journey from good in terms of subjective desire, what you want that you think is good, to the good in terms of what the truly right thing to do is. She makes a moral argument to her husband. Zeresh never makes that journey. She starts with what Haman wants to do and ends with what Haman wants to do. She says, I'm sorry that you don't appreciate everything in your life and that the one thing that you're missing is Mordechai bowing down to you. You want to kill him? Go ahead. Why don't you do that? Why don't you just kill him? That way, you'll be able to go to the king's banquet feeling very happy because you will have finally gotten rid of that one person who's become a thorn in your side. She's trying to make him happy. I just want my husband to be happy. I want to make him happy. The tragedy of Zeresh is that she really thinks she's doing the right thing for her husband. Haman is a misken. She's trying to help him facilitate his wants and his needs. I mean, what more can somebody want from their spouse than somebody who's going to fulfill their every desire? So she says, Haman, honey, go make the tree and hang Haman on it. Oh, she starts with his subjective desire and want and ends with his subjective and selfish desires. And if that's all you do, you're not really much of a spouse at all. You see, the original role of a spouse, as defined way back in Gan Eden, is to be an ezer kenegdo, a helpmate opposite him, opposite the man. A woman was created to help her husband, to be an ezer, but also to oppose him when necessary, when it's important. Kenegdo. The words ezer, kenegdo, means to help and to oppose. There are times that the way you help your husband the most is by opposing him. Of course, the right way. Sometimes you have to take a stand and say, my dear husband, I object. The way I'm going to make you happy is not by simply catering to your subjective needs, which could be very detrimental in the long run, but rather I'm going to help you place those needs and wants in the proper context and help you to see what's truly correct and right. Question is, how do you help your spouse see what's truly right? After all, many of you out there don't want your spouse to teach you moral lessons or offer you any musar, any rebuke. You don't want your spouse preaching to you. You may even get upset if your spouse tells you what's right and what's wrong and dictates and even threatens you and intimidates you. You just want your spouse to love and to accept you for who you are. But here's the thing. Those two things, meaning what's truly right and loving someone for who they really are, at a very deep level, those two things are intertwined. Loving someone for who they are is actually the greatest moral truth you could ever impart to your spouse. Let's see how. Well, take Zeresh and Haman, for example. What's the greatest gift that Zeresh could have given her husband at that moment that he came home so devastated, so enraged, you couldn't even talk to the guy? He says, I have everything. I have riches. I have children. I have power, but none of it means anything to me. All I want is that one thing that I can't seem to have. I want Mordechai out of my life. Dead, finito, kaput. As long as I see this guy every day sitting at the gates of the king, I'm enraged. I need this guy gone, out. What gift could she have given him at that moment? You know what she could have said? If she was smart, she could have said, Haman, darling, look at you. You're not valuing yourself for who you are. Why do you think you don't appreciate anything that you already possess? Is it a coincidence that every last thing that you've mentioned that you have, you don't think is worth much as long as Mordechai is still alive? You know, you think that you don't like the Jews, and especially one specific Jew who grates on your nerves. But in truth, there's just one person you really don't like or appreciate even more than Mordechai, and that's you. It's because you don't like yourself that you dislike every last thing you have. And that's why you're so enraged, because you realize something is wrong with you. If you truly liked yourself and held of yourself, no one and nothing would ever be a threat to you. And I suspect that if you finally acquired the one thing you don't have, which is Mordechai, out of your life for good, you'd still end up unhappy because you're getting rid of him in order to try and gain more kavod and love from other people. And that's not the greatest feeling in the world. At the end of the day, that feeling that you're left with is that you had to get rid of Mordechai in order to forcibly get somebody else to love you, in order for you to finally see yourself as powerful, as mighty, and deserving. Instead of just working on becoming a better version of yourself and gaining the respect of others all by yourself, from yourself, you think you could only feel happy and be happy and fully satisfied if you get rid of Mordechai. So I think that you should stop for a moment and think about your subjective needs, your wants, and your desires, because your feelings are indeed very subjective. What you really need to do is start liking yourself more. And then everything in your life will take a different perspective. Maybe if you start liking what you already do possess, you'll start appreciating yourself a little better. And if you don't believe it, just look at me, your wife. I don't need you to be rid of Mordechai in order to like you. I already love you for who you are. Mordechai is not a threat. So if that's enough for me, can't it be enough for you? Had she been able to give that gift to her husband Haman, the gift of truth, of moral truth, of some kind of moral compass, the good that is moral, it would have been the first step for him of breaking out of this prison that he was in, of his subjective needs, desires, and wants. It's then that Haman would have been able to see maybe the other meaning of good, of what is truly right, of what is emet, and what is genuinely noble. Perhaps it would have saved Mordechai's life, and in the end, it may have even saved her own husband's life. But Zeresh fails as a wife. She gives in to her husband's irrational, selfish, and subjective wants. She fans the flames of his rage and hands Mordechai to him on a silver platter. She says, "Here, build a tree, take the rope and hang him on it." And she helps him to do that. But what she did in those moments was actually serve her husband to the angel of death. In the end, it was Haman who was hanged on the very tree his wife helped him to construct. Esther Amalka, however, did just the opposite. Esther demands of her husband that he accept her for who she really is. Esther's argument is, it's not enough that you love me as this anonymous person. Why don't you find out who I really am, where I really come from? And then with all that information, my question to you is, can you still love me? Can you accept me then, knowing who I am? And when he does accept her, she wins her first battle with him. But then she leverages that love and she says, my dear husband, it's not enough for you to accept just me. I need you to accept the existence of my people as well. You can't just stop with recognizing my own humanity. If I'm a human being and I'm from them, then they're human beings as well, aren't they? They too have a right to be saved. So here we see two competing ways of replaying the story of the Etz Hadat Tovara. One way of replaying the story is to give your spouse the one thing he doesn't have yet, to cater to his every subjective want just to make this guy happy, and in so doing, to eventually destroy him. That's a Zeresh and Haman scenario, a failed replay of the story of Gan Eden. But then we have forbidden knowledge, knowledge that might seem dangerous, but is actually essential. That's the case of Esther, knowledge about who you really are, and to ask that your spouse accepts you for that. Esther does that and takes the king on a journey from what you might have thought you wanted to do to what is truly right and good to do. In the end, Esther is the heroine of the Megillah. Her actions were significant for the many hundreds of thousands of Jews that she saved, but even more globally, perhaps, on the historical scale of life, she saved us all. Because right here, at the very end of the Megillah, somebody has finally put to rest the terrible crime that has haunted mankind ever since that delightful, confusing fruit of the tree of knowledge first called to mankind. Esther teaches us the secret of how to rectify the story of Gan Eden, how to preserve our humanity, how to build worlds and not destroy them, how to channel our feelings to the place of morality, to create the ultimate salvation at the very end of creation. Now for us, Be'achrit HaYamim. Yehi Ratzon, that the lessons of the Megillah help us on our journey of life, not only as Torah observant Jews, but as women, as wives. And out there, if you guys, if the men are watching, it's a tool for you as well as a spouse. May all the lessons of Esther and her brilliance be used as a tool to promote the Tov that is truly good, right, moral, and just. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom u'mevorach.